Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third webinar in the series of Hyperion webinars. Today's topic is the linking of ERP and RIMs datasets. Specifically, we will be addressing the reasons for this linking, advantages of it, and how can this link improve interoperability within an organization. Before going further into introduction and objectives of today, just a small note that you're encouraged to post any questions or comments you may have in the chat box within this webinar. We will address them at the end of this presentation. A brief introduction of people you will be hearing today. My name is Sarah Verdijs and I'm the hostess of this webinar. I'm the consultant in Hyperion Life Sciences Consultancy with a focus on information management and as such including data standards like IDMP. The main speaker of today is Fritz Stolp, Managing Director of Hyperion Life Sciences Consultancy. He's known as an IDMP SME, Program Manager, and Trusted Client Advisor. Recently, he has been appointed as the IDMP Topic Lead in the IRIS Group. Our expert on ERP-RIMs topic is Duncan van Rijsbergen. Over the past 13 years, he has been working within the landscape of regulatory affairs. As such, he has extensive knowledge within several areas, examples being CMC, clinical, safety, and product information. Moving on to some more details about what we want to achieve today. First, we want to introduce the topic of ERP-RIMs linking as one of the great examples of the need to cross organizational silos. As such, it is an example of working towards increased data interoperability, and also it connects to our second webinar where we presented the idea of IDMP as one of the drivers towards this interoperability. Secondly, we want to show you the business benefits of ERP-RIMs linking. And thirdly, we will share the key steps to successfully linking these two data sets. Now on to the exciting parts, and I'm giving the word to Fritz.
Thank you, Sarah. Expectations are high for an exciting part, so let's kick off. First of all, thank you for joining. I'd like the next slide, please. But as Sarah has mentioned, IDMP, of course, has been a hot topic for quite some time, and for some people has also cooled down as a hot topic. We see regulators making limited progress, especially during 2017. And even though now the nomination of the new location of the EMA may have a revival on the IDMP efforts that you're expecting, overall the compliance for especially iteration 1 is still very much open. So are we addressing this topic today of ERP-RIMs alignment from a compliance perspective? Yes, we are, but not from an IDMP compliance perspective. The need of having a clear alignment between what you've agreed in your license with the authorities on the products that you're selling and the actual products that you're sending out, distributing, and selling to patients has always been a key topic. We regularly call it general product compliance, and it has a lot to do with having an interoperable data set available that describes both the product in a dossier form as well as in the actual form that's being shipped, distributed, manufactured, handled. If you have a data set that describes both, then of course it becomes easier or maybe even more automated to make sure that those two align, and also that any changes that occur there can be handled in a better way. Does this mean you have to implement ISO IDMP? Not necessarily, but it does mean that with the broad scope that ISO IDMP has with these 5 standards that are globally agreed and basically cover the entire gamut of the medicinal product data, it is a great opportunity to use that. It will certainly work just as well as any conventional standards that you may want to use, often not described, and it will certainly have the added value of a consistency across many organizations, as most people by now realize what ISO IDMP is. All of this can be seen within also the EMA context, because for the EMA, this topic has been addressed within iteration 4. But considering the timelines, that is still quite far away for all of us. While in fact, we have many challenges in our daily work that could be supported by addressing this interoperability issue between regulatory affairs and manufacturing and supply chain. That's what we would like to dive in today. First, I'd like to give a bit more context of what does this mean from an interoperability roadmap point of view. Next slide, please. The picture we've used in our previous webinar as well, but it's our view on what this evolution path can mean. We see three phases in here. The first one, of course, is where you start basically automating and recording information in a single source. It's very focused on an individual silo, perhaps I should call it a division, and it will record information that's key in allowing those processes to function optimally. A good example, of course, is your regulatory information management system, where you record your information on your dossiers and your regulated products, and basically have this at hand to do your regulatory work, to report on it, and basically you record everything there you need. Focus is often on the quality of your data and hopefully on the consistency of your data. But it doesn't take long before people from other divisions or other silos will ask questions based on the information that you have. This means you move to the second situation where another division or another silo will ask to receive that information in a more electronic format. And that often means that you invest into point-to-point interfaces that allow, in this case, your RIMs solution to communicate to other systems in the environment. An example we've mentioned last time already is, for example, the key information from your dossier that's required to do your pharmacovigilance activities. But another good example, of course, is the communication between your ERP and your RIMs. Although this already presents a number of efficiencies and benefits, it's still a point-to-point interface. And as soon as more of these interfaces become valid, you will have more and more individual interfaces that you need to maintain, that you may need to change occasionally, and all in all, expensive and difficult to maintain. And that pushes you into the next level, which we call the full integration and automation using master data management. Because many of the small dots around that center are the silo solutions that we see, the divisional solutions that automate a process within that area. But because we use common information across all those systems, which could be our list of customers, it could be our list of products, it could be our list of employees, it is really important to make sure that we have a common understanding of all that information that is similar to all of us. That is often information that we treat as master data. We agree which system is the master over that data and which other systems will follow the changes that that system will incur. If you go to this situation, you basically have a better understanding of what really describes your master data, and in our case, often our product information, and we can make sure that other systems can follow that. Next slide, please. If we look at this specific example, then of course it's important to realize that we have two worlds. First world is the one where regulatory affairs has of course worked closely together with development to make sure there is an agreement on the table with the relevant authorities on what this product is, of course its benefits, its dangers, but also which indications are allowed. All of that is described in a dossier, but that's also translated into what we call a regulatory information management system. Because with having so many dossiers, it's important to have a good overview of all those characteristics of the dossiers that you have. We've gone into much more detail on this topic in our RIMs webinar, which you can still find on our website. If I look at the right side of this picture, then it very much focuses on what we call operations. We could also call it manufacturing and supply chain. Different organizations use sometimes different terms, but that's where the physical, the real world comes in. We manufacture, we distribute, we package, we sell a real product, and that product should be in line with what we've agreed with the authorities. We have a license, and we're supposed to make sure that we only sell the product that's covered by the license. And I think all of us know that as soon as you step outside of that license, for one, you run risks of serious fines. And on the other hand, you are taking risks because you're working off-label, perhaps. So there is a lot of reason, a lot of drive to make sure that the regulatory world and the operational world match to one another, that there is a clear handshake on that information. I'll use that in some of the next slides, but the one point I would like to stress additionally is that these two worlds don't remain the same. They will change over time. On the manufacturing side, of course, there are many things that will change. You may have a new distributor. You may have a new supplier. You may have new ingredients. Perhaps one of your machines is being replaced. All in all, many of those changes will also be driven from an efficiency point of view. If you look at the other side, there may be changes on your product, its characteristics, but there may also be drivers from the regulatory authorities to change the way you describe things in your dossier, which could actually have an effect on the way you either manufacture or distribute. All in all, important that that cycle keeps a close eye on the versions that we have on both sides. That's something we often call change control. Let's look at this process chain in a little bit more detail in the next slide. We realize that we're starting here with an approved dossier, so we're not diving into the details of the development process. The approved dossier is made available. It is, of course, used within manufacturing to make sure the product is made according to the specifications that we have agreed, and that leads to a pharmaceutical product. That product will, of course, get packaged. First of all, primary package, it will get into a secondary package, and this, of course, is also where many of the country differences will be introduced. And it is made ready for one of the key steps in the pharmaceutical industry, the actual release of the product based on the specifications. Also a great example where the regulatory truth on this product needs to be fully aligned with the actual truth that we see in the specifications once it's being produced. When that check is passed, then the product can move on to the wholesaler, to the pharmacist, and hopefully help the patient in addressing whichever healthcare concern you may have. Now, if we look at the typical systems that play a role in these processes, and on the one hand, we see, of course, the Regulatory Information Management System, which has a strong focus on the approved dossier all the way to the product release, and then also lets it go. It contains the product information so we can plan and control of what is authorized. If we look at the bottom side, then there is the so-called ERP system, which is very much focused on the planning and controlling of what we actually produce. It may support your actual manufacturing process, but it will certainly have a good look across the distribution that you're planning. With the introduction of the Falsified Medicines Directive, also known as EMBS, in 2019, it becomes more and more important to have a full track and trace of your product all the way to the patient. As soon as the pharmacist hands it out and has scanned that barcode on your product, which is known as serialization, it gets recorded where it has gone. And actually, this wasn't done from a patient safety point of view. This is being set up to be anti-counterfeiting. Nevertheless, it of course increases strongly the supply chain traceability of products. Working on a common process with different systems is almost asking for trouble, because how can you make sure you all have the same understanding of what's going on there and that you use the same terms? I'd like to go to the next slide. Where in a very simplified form, I've shown the same picture, and actually this blue person is wondering whether the yellow manufacturer has been approved. Can I use it? And looks across this chain, looks at the manufacturer who's playing a role in making the blue pill that's being used in a specific country and should have an approval from that authority, which is then documented in a dossier. Now, if I need to make sure that I know all this as a key player in the process, I need to make sure that we have a common language. Preferably, we've done an alignment of our processes, and I need to be capable of exchanging the data that's relevant for my process to those that need to give input into my process. All in all, regulatory and operations work together to achieve a common goal of operational excellence and compliance. Because I think we all realize that the real differentiator is in the products that we develop from R&D, the way we market them, and not so much in the way we make sure that there is adequate supply going to the patients, because that's something we should do trustworthy, low costs, and within the boundaries of compliance. Now, this is one of the examples of why you would want this information to be aligned across these two processes, but it's not the only one. Let's go to the next slide. We've put a number of blue boxes here, and two of those we will dive into in a bit more detail, but let me take you through. A good understanding of all the products that you have across those different markets, those different country markets or even regional markets, and the registrations that describe those, can really help you to understand where actually you're being most cost efficient or even profit efficient in your products. So making decisions there is very much based on the information of both sides of the line. Making changes on either side, either the regulatory side or the operation side on a product, is something that needs to be aligned. A quick and complete identification of those relevant SKUs, which of course is a term that's a bigger favorite from operations than it is from regulatory, can help you identify which regulatory documents will be affected, which can also work vice versa. And even furthermore, it is something that we would prefer to plan instead of find out as a surprise. Again, for that reason, it's important that these two data sets can communicate. Now, other examples include, from our dossier, from our license, we know what we can print on the package, can include in the package, all in all, can put on our artwork. That artwork is printed and created on the operation side. So it is essential that you have the approved version of your specifications of your artwork available for proper use on the operation side, including its changes that may occur. I think we've discussed in general that you should avoid any divergence between ERP and RIMs data for compliance sake. And we've also addressed in our previous picture the need of having traceability. In other words, of applying the Falsified Medicines Directive, which also has a lot of requests on having that aligned data available. If we look at other submissions, then especially with IDMP, especially with iteration 4, we see more and more that operational data on our product, supply chain type of data on our product, is important in the submission we will do on that product to allow its continued use in the market. Finally, does this lead to any efficiencies? Because all of these items may be very interesting, but they still have a strong sense of compliance to them. Well, as a matter of fact, having the data defined once, making sure that the data is correct, and actually avoiding any scrapping of product based on always having this data aligned and making sure you have the same version of the truth, has a huge impact, not to mention a minimizing of double entry. All in all, it introduces interoperability. It allows you to exchange relevant information on the product across multiple phases of the process within your organization and where needed outside of your organization. Let's take these two yellow examples in a bit more detail. First of all, we spoke about portfolio management. Now, this is a very nice high-level picture which shows you what that typically could mean. We see the dimension of operations where we actually produce the product. We have our dossier that describes what we have agreed, in this case for the different markets. So we see 3 countries in this listing. We see what's agreed on the lower side, and we see what we're actually producing and distributing on the top side. We see that there is a package of 2 and a package of 3 that is described, both from a dossier point of view, but also from an actual production point of view. The good news of this picture is that in none of the countries we are moving outside of our dossier. But if we really want to find what is the most optimal way of determining which products to sell in which quantity, then this type of overview is exactly what you need across your regulatory and your operational world. And it will allow you to make a consolidation where possible and thereby get the best efficiencies when you make choices. The second example in the next slide is one that we've also discussed a few times now, and is all about change control. If we make a change from the blue factory to the yellow factory, we will have to look which products are impacted. We will need to know to which countries are these products produced and what is the regulatory status of the change that we have there. And once that change is approved, like the lower line, you can actually implement as you have planned. But to know what the status of your implementation is in these different countries has a lot of effect on the overall compliance that you're trying to achieve. And we all know that the throughput time of an approval in this case may vary strongly country by country. All in all, a strong plea to make sure that your ERP information and your regulatory information is comparable and can be aligned and can be used in such decision making. With that, I'd like to hand over to Duncan van Rijsbergen for a bit more details.
Thank you, Fritz. So now Fritz has told us what we want to reach and why we would want to reach that. The question is, how do we get there? And especially in this subject, which has been playing for a long time within the industry as a desired goal, we can ask the question, where do we start? So let us just show you a way you could follow. Can I have the next slide, please? The first thing we have to realize is that these two systems of ERP and RIMs share one thing in common. They both represent products. They do this from different points of view, but the product is still central in both systems. We may use different terminology to describe those products, and we might assign different attributes to them, but actually the central point of the products is still there. The fact that there are different attributes in both systems actually allows us to get the information that Fritz has told us about we want to exchange between those systems. Can I have the next slide? The attributes in the various systems that we want to exchange can be categorized in a few forms. Some of the attributes that are in both systems are actually the same. Other attributes are similar, but they're not entirely the same. A typical example could be that you have the authorized value of something in your RIM system, while in your ERP system you might have the actual value. You can already see that in this, between these two values, there's a question of, are we still in compliance? Or do we need to change our dossier to match what is happening in the real world? And then a third category, which is one of the most interest for us to get the information we need, is those items that are in one database but not in the other. Those are the typical items we might want to exchange. Some of them are very relevant to the processes we have mentioned before. Other items might not be so, at first sight, so relevant for this, the procedures we want to manage. However, it could be that in the future there will be use cases where those data might actually be useful to exchange as well. In that case, the common link between the two systems allows you to also work with those use cases. This also emphasizes that the choice of use case is very important for how you make this link. So how do we go about making that link? Can I have the next slide, please? So if we look at the both systems, they both have a representation of what a product is. But that representation is not necessarily the same. So what we want to do in order to exchange information between the two systems is to map the product representation in the one system to that in the other system. When we do so, we will find that actually it is not always easy to match these two product representations together. There will be complexities between those two, resulting from differences in how the products are represented. And this produces challenges to how we create a mapping between the two systems and how we maintain these over time. So in order to get a stable mapping, we have to take into account a number of factors. And in the next slide, we will go through these. So in Hyperion, we work with a general model for interoperability, and the ERP and RIM situation is a good example of showing how this works. In this model, we have 4 factors: organization, information, process, and technology. In this case, we can use these 4 factors as a step plan to get to our ERP-RIMs linking. The first step is to bring the right functions together. The second step is to define a common product model. The third step is to ensure that our processes align in order to keep the product mapping stable over time. And finally, when we have done all these, we can find a suitable technical or even non-technical solution. Let's look at all these factors in some more detail, starting with organization. A key step in bringing about the link between ERP and RIMs is bringing the responsible functions, operations, and regulatory affairs together in a room to discuss how they refer to products and how they handle them in their processes. In this way, the goal is to find a common vocabulary to discuss those processes and the products. This is a key factor in establishing a way to exchange information, because if you do not understand what happens in the process of the other function, there can never be true information exchange. This bringing together of the operations and regulatory function should not only happen at the level of subject matter experts who actually know what's happening in the processes and in the systems. It should also happen at the senior management level, because there is where the actual driving force for making this linking happen comes from. Investing in an ERP-RIMs link is something that takes effort in the short run and benefits in the long run. Therefore, it's important that senior management supports this exercise. A third group that we need to involve with these discussions is the business intelligence function or IT function, depending how this is organized in your company. Involving business intelligence allows us to, allows business intelligence to directly be involved with finding the needs of the various business functions and finding the right technological solution. When this has been done, we move to the second phase, which is regarding information. What we want to get to is that we are able, based on the properties of what we call a product object, and I will explain in a minute what that means, in one system to find the same product object in the other system. So what do I mean with a product object? Well, if you look at a product, you can describe it on several levels. Everybody who is in pharmaceutics will be familiar with this. And as an example, we have put here a list of these layers that you could see in a product. The first layer is that what we have called here the product set. This is what we in common parlance use when we talk about a product. It is the combination of an active substance in a certain dosage form at a certain strength. However, certainly from an operational point of view, a product should also be properly packed, and that is actually the units that we distribute all over the world. So to come to a different layer, we can talk about the packaged product, which is actually the product set, as mentioned before, combined with a certain pack type, a blister or bottle, and a pack size, the number of capsules in your blister or the number of milliliters of a fluid in your bottle. Beyond the packaged product, there's also the licensed product. Because of course, these packaged products may go to multiple markets. And in those markets, they have a marketing authorization. Another way of looking at our products is actually thinking about manufacturers. In the operational situation, we often distinguish products that are the same in terms of their packaging, their composition, by the manufacturer that produces them. So another way to look at the product is to combine the packaged product with its manufacturer. The exact choice of layers or product objects that you choose depends on your product portfolio. For example, if you have a very simple product portfolio just consisting of tablets, you could theoretically think, oh, I do not need all these layers because my products are all alike. Another factor that you have to take into account is which use cases you want to support. Depending on the detail of the data you need, you might want to introduce more layers. A typical example is what I mentioned before about using the layer of the manufactured product. Now, as I said before, if your product portfolio is very simple, you could choose to use less layers. However, we always have to realize that in the future, your product portfolio might change. New products might come in that do not fit a simple model. Similarly, you might also find out in the future that there are actually use cases that you did not think about that you might want to support further on. So it's also important to be careful with choosing a too narrow model for your product. Once you have found a suitable product object that supports your now and future use cases and your current and future portfolio, you can start mapping the product objects in the two systems. It might seem that at that point you are ready to go. But we have to remember that there is a factor we have to take into account, and that is time. And that brings us to our third aspect of this process, and that is processes itself. After all, we want to keep the mapping of our product objects stable over time. But if we look at the different processes within the operations and the regulatory side, we see that actually there might be different ways that product objects change over time. An example could be that in an operational situation, you often think in stock keeping units, which when a change occurs are completely replaced, whilst the corresponding packaged object in a RIM system will remain where it is and just changes attributes. In that case, the link between the two product objects and the mapping is severed. So it's very important that processes are properly aligned, that you check the triggers for change and also the timing of those triggers to see that the mapping remains stable over time. This does not only apply to your processes for change control, but also for your processes for entering data in the separate systems. Because it is important that the entry of data in those systems always complies with the product model that you used for the mapping. Often when you critically look at your processes for entry of data, you will find that actually there are some degrees of freedom that allow for a variety of ways to enter data. Normally, this can be overcome if you only work with one system, but once you have a mapping in place, you want to be sure that your product objects remain as they are, and therefore the entry becomes more critical to maintain the mapping. Once we have done all these three steps, we finally come to the step that often happens as the first step, but should actually be only done after we've gone through these three steps, and that is selecting the right technology for your situation. Now, there are multiple ways to connect ERP and RIM systems. And the solution you choose should be based on what your product portfolio is and which use cases you want to support. However, we warn you not to choose too lightly for simple point-to-point solutions that only support a few use cases. Again, because your situation may change over time, your portfolio might change, and the things you want to support with your ERP-RIMs link may also increase or require extra data. So this is important to take into account when choosing a technological solution. We have listed here a number of strategies you could use to link the two systems. I will highlight a few factors in this. So actually, if you look at the bottom, there is still the manual process. If you can link your ERP and RIM systems through a manual process, and then you do not need technology. However, you still need to do the previous 3 steps to establish this, because if you want to easily merge the data, you should have a stable mapping over time, so to easily match 2 data sets together. If you do not have this, the manual integration will become a very laborsome task, which will cost lots of resources and also make you less flexible. So this kind of solution is only suited in a strict trained environment with strict procedures for maintaining your data and a reasonably overseeable portfolio of products. Other solutions are more simple situations where you try to link the 2 systems directly, either at a single level or multi-level. This is a typical example of what we call a point-to-point solution. It could work for your situation, but beware of the point I mentioned before, that changes in your product portfolio and especially in your use cases may render such a solution insufficient over time. More advanced solutions that, however, also ask for much more effort are in order of complexity: data warehousing, defining a common product model in a third system, where you define the product model but not the data in the third system, and the final point, and relating back to the last step of maturity that Fritz mentioned in his introductory story, is that of master data management, where you handle your product objects in a first system, and the ERP and RIMs systems only handle transactions on those master data. So these are a number of technological solutions that could be applied, but it's always important to run through the 3 first steps first, to set up your use cases and define the requirements you need for your specific business situation. We can now summarize in the next slide our ERP-RIMs formula for interoperability. So again, we need to start out bringing the right functions together, determine the use cases you need, and find a common vocabulary. Based on those use cases in your product vocabulary, you find the proper product model, apply this to the data sets in both systems to find your product objects and map these product objects together. To maintain a stable mapping over time, you need to align your processes in terms of triggers, timing, and data handling. Finally, when you have done those steps, you have to find the right technological solution that helps you maintain the mapping over time, but more especially to exchange the data you actually need for your use cases and gain the benefits you are seeking. When you choose a technological solution, never forget that you also want to support your future product portfolio and use case needs that develop in the future. So with this formula, we gave you a highlight of how you could approach the linking of your ERP-RIM system. And I'd like to hand back now to Fritz to give you some final conclusions.
Thank you, Duncan. As we mentioned in the beginning, we are an industry that has been grown from original divisional silo approaches. All of those silos are quite complex, so managing your silo on its own is enough challenge for most. But because many of the information requirements that we have and the actual ways that these processes are being executed push us more and more into an end-to-end processing, we need to be ready for that from an information management point of view. Our information management should support this enterprise-wide way of looking at it, and the key word then is interoperability of that information. The capability of handing over information sets that we all understand, that aligns to the definitions that we have in our process and allow us to make the right decisions. A good example, of course, like we discussed today, is the role of ERP coming from operations and the role of RIMs coming from regulatory. And these two processes have something to do with each other. Considering the fact that ERP is not just managing manufacturing and supply chain, but for example, also product profitability or even the overall financial situation, just to mention an example, it makes a lot of sense to make sure that the regulatory truth of our products is also available on that side of the line. These are benefits that immediately will take your business stakeholders into efforts like these. They are not IDMP compliance benefits, they are business benefits. All in all, you need this common representation of products to do this in a stable situation. We look at the organization, the information, the processes, and the technology, and we are happy to be working with some of our clients at this moment to do this. Every client is different, even though from a very high level, they all work with some type of ERP and some type of RIMs. But we often see that differences in choices, like the product hierarchy, like the complexity that you introduce in each system, but also the actual systems that you've chosen, and not to mention the different ways that you run your processes, they all introduce specific challenges for these organizations. Nevertheless, by now we've been able to extract a number of general lessons that we can apply to all of them to reach the next steps. I hope this webinar has been useful for you. I think at the end of this deck, as Sarah will explain, we also have a quick overview of an approach that we apply at clients, and of course invite you to contact us if you have more interest on knowing that. Thank you for joining, and I would like to get back to Sarah.
Thank you, Fritz. Thank you, Duncan, for this very clear presentation. So before I give you a small marketing update, I would again like to invite you to write any questions or comments you may have, and we will address them in a minute. So topic of our next and fourth webinar in the series is structured content authoring. You will be hearing more about what structured content authoring is, how it can be used, but also what kind of benefits it brings. Date is set to be the 16th of January in the next year, and you can again register for the 2 time slots in the morning or afternoon, and we will also provide you with the link to the registration page. To bring all the 4 topics of our previous webinars together, so first RIMs, second IDMP, third ERP, and fourth structured authoring, we will also have a final and 5th webinar about integrated information management. We will keep you up to date with the exact time. I think this would be a good time to check for any questions. So far, no questions. We will wait a few more moments so you have the opportunity to do so. Okay, so after this webinar, you will be receiving the materials and recording directly to your email, but you can always visit our website for more information and also for the recordings and materials of our previous webinars. So as Fritz briefly mentioned already before, one last thing I want to inform you about is that in the materials you will be getting, there's also outline of our approach we're using at our clients on how you can start and address this ERP-RIMs linking topic. So in case you have any questions when you see this approach, please do contact us. So finally, I want to thank you all for participating. I wish you a great afternoon, and I hope to speak with you soon. Thank you.